artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, this is episode 260. What does the ideal integration of humans and technology look like in business in the future? I've been talking with Nada Sanders, who calls that a Hum machine. She's a thought leader and expert in forecasting and human technology integration. Nada has an MBA and a PhD in supply chain management and is an expert in digital transformation, having served on numerous executive boards and a frequently called upon keynote speaker. She's author of 7 books, and in 2023, the second edition of The Hum Machine, Humankind, Machines and the Future of Enterprise was published. She was ranked as a world's top 2% of scientists in a 2020 Stanford study, is a fellow of the Decision Sciences Institute, has served on the board of directors of the International Institute of Forecasters, Decision Sciences Institute, and in 2022 was awarded the prestigious Robert D. Klein Lecturer Award by Northeastern University. Last week, we talked about the ideal relationship between humans and AI, Kasparov's law, what skills have atrophied in the younger workforce, how software jobs are changing, and where to set the boundary between AI assistance and human assistance. Today, we're going to talk about intentionality, integration, implementation, and indication, what to digitize in digital transformation, KPIs and other indicators of success in an AI-first business, and how culture needs to shift in the enterprise. So let's get back into the interview with Nada Sanders. I want to pivot here to return to the concept of the Hum machine as a distinction and explore its utility in creating something that represents a direction for the future of work at an enterprise. Boy, that was a mouthful. But the idea of going from descriptive to prescriptive, if creating a Hum machine is something that we should look at intentionally, then we need to understand it. And you have talked about intentionality, integration, implementation, and indication, and perhaps those are relevant to my question. Go on.
Sure. So I had mentioned to you, I think earlier as we spoke, it's very important to understand that one size doesn't fit all. And it's a real mistake, as right now everybody wants to follow the leader. What's everybody doing? What's the capability? And I think there's a little bit of this kind of a shock and freeze mentality in terms of how do we proceed, especially at a time when we look at the global economy. And as you and I touched on in terms of the tariff cases and what it means for the financial picture, I could tell you companies that I speak with now with what's going on are really holding on to in delaying major capital investments. And when we look at AI investment, it's a huge outlay. So I think it's imperative for a company to really look at in terms of what it's trying to achieve in the marketplace. How does it differentiate? What is its intentionality? What is the business model? Is this business model going to look different? In fact, one of the CEOs that I interviewed, Spencer Fung, and I can use his name, he's the CEO of Li & Fung, he explained to me, he said it is critical for every business, every company in this time period to reassess its business model rather than just digitizing the current business model. So he said to me, and I love the analogy, he said, basically, a company that is just digitizing what they currently have is kind of like a company digitizing a horse and buggy while the competition has come up with a car or an automobile. So I love the analogy because you have to reassess the business model. Then what am I competing on? What are the critical measures? One of the things, as we started at the onset, is my background is in operations management, supply chain. Back in the day, when I was very young, I used to actually train companies on the Toyota production system and lean. And one of the tenets that I live by is that 80-20 Pareto's law principle, ABC analysis in inventory or with clients, meaning that there's so many names for it, the vital few. Basically, we have a handful of inventory items or goods, handful of clients, handful of priorities, you name it, that really matter. So it's really critical for a company to understand what really matters to it and how do you digitize those things that matter. Don't focus on everything. Identify what matters to you as a company. And then how do you achieve that? And that's where the intentionality comes in. What are you about as a company? And then you get into the implementation issues in terms of acquiring the technology to help you achieve that intentionality, not what your competitor is doing, but what you're trying to do and maximize and leverage what you're acquiring. It doesn't have to be expensive. And we've seen this with some of the latest iterations with AI, with Deep View, and so forth. I very much believe that creativity, human creativity overlaid on top of AI and figuring out how to leverage it in the best way can achieve some great outcomes without just throwing money against the wall and seeing kind of what sticks. And then when you layer down the metrics, continuous improvement, knowing what to measure, and that's a whole nother conversation because we have traditional ROI metrics that so many companies will use, return on investment, payback period. But in many cases, we are looking at strategic advantage that is much more difficult to measure and much more elusive. So I think these are all things that have to be revisited in a very strategic way. And this is where executives and executive judgment and human judgment comes in rather than just surrendering to the traditional metrics.
I love that horse and buggy example there. I want to use that.
You too, right?
If you digitize that, you'd have to do digital manure spreading.
Exactly.
So if a human machine represents the ideal integration of humans and technology in the future, what sort of KPIs would a business look towards to see how well they were doing in that?
Again, it really very much depends on the business and also with the layer of people and talent within the business. One of the things that I think is really important when it comes to the KPIs, however, is that we tend to, as businesses, usually focus on very short-sighted performance measures in terms of whether it be sales or the kind of metrics that are easy to measure in terms of outcomes. The problem with that is it does not give way to more strategic, ambitious metrics that allow creativity. And I would suggest a couple of things. One, I think, and this has been true for so many companies for a long time, too many metrics. There's just too many KPIs. And, when I bring this up with executives, it's always underscored to be the case because as humans, you and I, when we're dealing with people, it becomes really difficult to know what we are performing on. So AI can actually help a lot with that as you think about the kind of KPIs you're going to use for humans that are going to give latitude in order to give opportunity for long-term investment in that person, not just say short-term sales. What were your sales this past performance, this past quarter or past month or even week, but rather have more aspirational metrics. This is also the part that comes into when it comes from a management and leadership standpoint in terms of training and investing in people, where you build relationships and you mold people. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday as it happened, and he was telling me that he hired 3 people for his business that were in the creative arts, and I think he was in manufacturing. He said, "I'd never done that before, and I was really surprised how their creativity was they were able to come up with ideas as to look at the business in a very different kind of a way that I really hadn't thought about, and in terms of what we were going to do." And he did not come in going, "Oh, your performance quotas are what the traditional ones have been, and we're going to measure you on these performance quotas," but rather looking at more of a long-term performance that does require judgment. And he was saying it takes judgment on my part to do an intuitive, and he used the word intuitive, by the way, multiple times. And I have to tell everybody, this person comes from the military, very quantitative. So he did say it is very unusual for me to really get to the point where I believe in intuitive answers, not just the ones that are driven by metrics. And that comes to evaluating your subordinates and people in your business environment. It's not going to just come down to the metrics. Because if you look at the metrics, you are overlooking personal issues that may come at play, personal drive. There's a lot of times many of us actually perform at a lower level for a certain amount of time because we are reskilling and retooling, only to leapfrog, right? And then to excel in metrics down the road. So this is, again, where human judgment is going to have to come into play. So one, and I'm being pretty lengthy in my answer because it is complicated. They want a simple answer, but less metrics and use your judgment in terms of which ones you're going to use.
Maybe a direction here that suggests itself to me from what you're saying is that KPIs and numerical indicators, those are what companies live and die by, of course, for obvious reasons, because money is a number, or it's represented by numbers. But the qualities that you were talking about earlier that companies are now more interested in, they assume people are already good at coding and procedural things that AI can also do, and that they're looking for these human skills. We talked about intuition, public speaking, communication, and empathy. Those are notoriously hard to measure. Ways of doing that are just not tenable numerically in a large corporation. And so maybe the human machine represents a division of responsibility in that the KPIs now become the function of the AI and mechanical side of the business, and the non-quantifiable qualities that we were talking about that are so important belong to the humans who don't even try to attach KPIs to them on the kind of scale that the other side of the business has to deal in.
Yes, and I think it obviously depends on the job, but I think as we move into the future, more and more of these human jobs are going to require the human skills, precisely for the reasons that you had mentioned. Look, we cannot compete with the machines. It's not even a question in terms of the volume of data and processing. And in fact, we are learning how to query all that data so much better, much more effectively. Now, if you were to give a purely unemotional, obviously, mathematical question regarding performance to an AI, it will not take into the kind of human qualities and the human insights that I think should still remain with the human when it comes to performance, precisely because issues of creativity. And if you think about, like, I always give this example that we all know because we all use them. I'm looking around my office here, those yellow stupid sticky notes that we all can't live without. And if we think about how much money these sticky notes have made over the decades for 3M, and exactly, right? I see Peter's got them. I've got mine here too. But think about the fact that something like that innovation, when you look at a longer term horizon, you come up with this solution, which they did, to a problem that didn't exist. So they came up with a material for the sticky notes that was an accident. And there for years was simply, there was no, what do we use this for? We have no idea. It just sat there until I believe one of the developers had taken it by accident to church, I think it was, and had a church hymnal, right? I see you nodding, and could say, hey, wait, this is useful. And now we fast forward and we see this incredible innovation that has been used for decades and decades. It's a great example because depending on the length of the time horizon, if we keep using a very short time horizon to measure performance, we're going to be looking at some very small innovations. If we're looking for disruptive, large innovations, sometimes, a lot of times, they take a longer amount of time. They're much more difficult to measure. And remember that AI looks backwards. AI looks at the data that it has. Now, granted, it can combine it a lot of ways, but it has data that has been given to it. As humans, we put together things that are incredibly disparate. And the sticky notes are a great example of something that is so disparate, right? You've got the sticky material. Wait, what? Is it useful? I don't know, only to uncover that in this very curious way, it is remarkably useful. AI cannot do that. So we need to also look at a longer time horizon to measure innovation. If we look at KPIs, coming full circle to what you had asked, and you look at the traditional short time horizon, we're not going to be looking at these breakthrough innovations that require a longer term time horizon. Also, as humans, we don't perform consistently at a steady pace, right? I mean, Peter, sometimes there are Mondays that we're a little tired. Wednesdays, we might be at a peak, Friday afternoon, or maybe we're getting over the flu or the cold. And other times we're full of energy. AI doesn't do that. It's the same. But when we are full of energy, when we are full of creativity, there's a bounty there that AI cannot compete with, I would say, in a very different dimension now. And it's combining those two dimensions and goes back to that process that Kasparov has talked about. In fact, I would argue, Peter, so many companies, and I've written on the Hugh machine and Kasparov's law and the process of integration, so many companies have still not gone after the issue of that process of integration, understanding that that process of integration is where the real nugget lies in terms of success, not so much in getting the latest and greatest AI.
And you're talking about the role of humans in the future here and being our best selves. And that makes me think about how the corporate culture and values plays a part of this. When you're engaged with a corporation, how does that show up in the work that you're doing with them? Because corporate values can be all over the map, and some corporations use technology to abuse their people. Examples are like the way Amazon monitors people, Uber does as well, and there are countless others, just to put two names out. And they would have done it with or without the technology. It's just a reflection of their values and their culture. But when you're working with a company, does the corporate culture and their values come into the conversation, and where does that lead?
It's a great question. For me, values are extremely important. And it would be really difficult for me to use or give my skills and talent where I did not feel that the values, I just couldn't do that. Having said that, I have tried very hard to be objective and tell companies, I'm not judging good or bad, but I'm telling you that being kind and giving the best to your people is simply good business. So whether you're doing it because you're altruistic or not, it is simply good business. And I say this to leaders. I'm not judging you, but I'm telling you that being kind and giving the best to your people is smart business. And a great example is the SAS Institute. The SAS Institute has for years been one of the best places, been ranked as one of the best places to work. The company, actually, their pay grade is a little bit lower than the average, but their workers are so happy. And the president of the company has multiple times said, it is simply good business. And so what is in his heart, I cannot comment on it, but I think it is incredibly short sighted to not understand that it is good business to make workers happy because workers are going to be much more productive. And it is a win win scenario. And I remember when I was a young professor, and this was before Amazon or the very start of Amazon. And Walmart was the big retailer at the time. And there was a lot of controversy at the time, and students said, oh, no one will ever take down Walmart. You know, when you've worked long enough, you see businesses come and go. And having longevity is really important. And I really believe it is investing in your talent that we've seen bankruptcies. We've seen companies that have not been able to ride out storms that were difficult to anticipate. COVID was a great example. And it really comes down to being able to work with your talent, work with your people, and work with your suppliers. And being able to have, right after COVID, as we're coming out of COVID, I was talking to a big name in the aerospace industry, and it wasn't Boeing, so I just say that. But I asked him, I said, how did you get through all of this? And what was your secret to success? And he said, believe it or not, the secret to success was literally picking up the phone, calling suppliers, talking to them as humans and saying, what can we do to help you? And it wasn't about looking at the numbers and technology and all of that kind of stuff, but saying, hey, what can we do to help you? I think those are the things that will make a company last. And I think those are the kinds of things that boards, investors need to look at. Because again, when you're looking at boards, and this is very important for boards and investors because they tend to stay much, much longer than CEOs and executives. I recommend that they put pressure and they look at leadership that actually cares about talent across all sectors, meaning internally as well as across the supply chain.
Yeah, I love how you put that, Nada. And it reminded me of something that a friend of mine, Dan Turchin, who has the AI in the Future of Work podcast, says that a company will not and cannot treat its customers any better than its employees. So as we move towards the end of our time here, I want to take a longer term view here, looking into the future. And you've written about superintelligence. And I wonder what at this point in the conversation you would like to say about superintelligence, what that means to you and what it should mean to enterprises looking at moving into a human-machine future.
Yeah, thank you. So we are definitely embarking on the superintelligence realm as we see the capabilities of AI. I mean, every day that all of us that are using AI, we see the capability evolving rapidly. But this is really a dance between the human and the AI. Now, let's take that further. Teams of humans and teams of algorithms. That is really what the superintelligent enterprise is. It's the network of algorithms and humans that are evolving their human skills in a team environment and individually with the algorithms, with the agent. The AI agent is just that. It's a co-pilot, and they work seamlessly together. We are definitely there, and companies that embrace it, there's no question they are going to be evolving faster. Everybody can embrace it on the scale that they need within their particular marketplace, because not everybody needs the same level of automation, the same level of quantitative processing. But to some degree, that superintelligence is that network of the right and the best human skills that we continue to evolve with the network of AI agents working seamlessly through that process that Gary Kasparov talked about.
Wow. Thank you. So, final thoughts for our listeners. What should they take away with respect to if they're engaged in a business, in any kind of leadership function, managerial function, or just working to make a better future for everyone? Where would they want to engage with your output, your thinking, And this is the opportunity also to talk about where they can find out more about your work, past and future books, and anything else.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. So I'm at nadasanders.com is my website. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I can tell you I respond to everybody, everyone. I've responded to high school students. I responded to CEOs, and I am growing and evolving just like everybody listening. And I think that's the key. That is the answer, is to understand that we don't have the answers. Don't trust the talking heads. Everybody thinks they have the answers. They don't, but we have to pay attention, and we have to really focus on tapping into more of those human qualities. I hate to sound just like everybody else in terms of less screen time, less digital time, but we have to make time in order to evolve some of these human skills, because unless we are talking about disengaging from the workforce, that I don't think most of us are, the future, even in the next few years, is going to look very, very different. We have to pay attention to make sure that we are reskilling and evolving with it.
I love how you put that. When I think about positive visions of the future that show up in books, TV, movies, they don't show me people who are spending more time staring at screens. They show me people relating to each other and technology taking the backseat in that relationship. And I think that's where it should belong.
Yes, yes. And there is something to the human physical relationship, as we have overlooked what we as humans need, that there are certain things that we need, certain contact, certain ways of interacting, the empathy that we simply don't get from the screen. I remember, I'll just leave with this. I actually had a student last semester who was working for the Boston Ballet. And he said to me that the conductor explained that there was something about humans that we needed to have a real orchestra because of the way that we vibrated and the way that we actually, our auditory system. And I thought that was really interesting. I actually started researching it. I didn't find any studies. Be really curious, anybody listening, if there's some studies on it. But the fact that we respond differently when we listen to live music. And the conductor was saying, this is why with the ballet, we need to have a live orchestra. That goes to the human experience. And then we could take that to the way we interact as teams in the business environment and everything that we do. There is something that is missing, but all we are doing is interacting with screens. And we need to be very mindful of that.
Thank you for that example. I am going to be thinking about that one a lot more in the future, and I'm sure our listeners will too. Nada Sanders, thank you very much for coming on AI and You.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
That's the end of the interview. I'm really gripped by this idea that came to me near the end, that we're knocking at the door of the future of work, or the potential future of work, defined by humans inhabiting spaces that aren't so easily occupied by AI. Think of it as beyond the KPIs. It seems obvious, and something we've been saying for years, but I think there's a fresh new drive to find a place for humans that is outside the trajectory of where AI is going. And that surely lies in domains that are unquantifiable or less quantifiable. The concrete metrics of how a business is doing. AI has got that handled. Now, it's time for humans to find their place outside that. Having conditioned ourselves to think and behave so much like idealized machines for so long, this is a challenge. If you liked what you heard on this podcast, if you want to hear more and better episodes, please do give us a like and a 5-star rating and a nice review. Lots of hosts nag you every episode for this. I keep forgetting, but it matters a lot. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, a new model paradigm with the ultra-cool name of Absolute Zero, I'm getting serious apocalypse vibes from that name, was proposed in a recent paper from researchers at Tsinghua University, the Beijing Institute for General Artificial Intelligence, also a very cool name, and Penn State. They built a version called the Absolute Zero Reasoner, AZR. It creates its own training problems, solves them, and learns without human intervention. Reminds me of AlphaZero teaching itself to play Go. And those self-taught models actually outperform specialized systems trained on expert-created datasets in general reasoning and coding tasks. They conclude, quote, "We believe this could finally free reasoning models from the constraints of human-curated data and marks the beginning of a new chapter for reasoning models. Welcome to the era of experience." That's pretty weighty stuff. They have released the code, models, and logs as open source. Next week, my guests will be Janae Duane and Steve Fisher, authors of the new book, Super Shifts, Transforming How We Live, Learn, and Work in the Age of Intelligence. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's AIANDYOU.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.